Minister, there's reports emerging that there's been quite a serious warning from NAFIT on the direction of travel on COVID. Are there any concerns in government about this? Have you been briefed on this?
Well, look, I think we've all seen in particular the numbers of hospitalisations and particularly individuals in ICU increase. It is something that government is looking very closely at. At present, there's no plans to change the plans for the 22nd of October, but I think the government has always been guided by public health advice. I understand NEFIT is meeting next week, and we'll obviously look to see what comes from that meeting.
Minister, can you just maybe expand on, I know it hasn't formed part of your budget announcement, but just in terms of childminders and childminding, you, I think, launched a strategy on that earlier this year. Can you tell us where that's at, I suppose, and when, for example, people who use childminders could stand to benefit from things like access to the National Childcare Scheme, universal subsidies and stuff like that, please?
Yeah, well, that's a core objective for us, is that people who use childminders are able to access the National Childcare Scheme. A childminder has to be registered with TUSLA in order to access the National Childcare Scheme, and there's only a very small number at the moment because there are certain requirements that childminders have to meet in order to be registered. So the Childminding Action Plan is basically a way to provide childminders with, I suppose, supports to allow them become registered and therefore allow them to allow the parents who are using their service to benefit from the NCS. So look, our Childminding Action Plan, it's a 3-year plan in total, isn't it?
It runs to 2028, but the first phase is for 3 years.
The first phase is a three-year phase. So it's about putting in place the necessary regulations, because one thing, Hugh, that childminders were very clear on, they don't want the same regulatory structure applied to them as is applied to an early year facility, because the situation is different. So I'd hope within the next 2 to 3 years we would start to see a significant number of childminders being in a position to be fully regulated and therefore being the parents using their service to benefit from the NCS.
Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry, one more question. Just the mother and baby homes compensation scheme, where's that at? There's no announcement in the budget in relation to funding of that. Where are you going to get the money for that?
Yeah. No, myself and Minister McGrath made the decision that the redress will be addressed after the budget. Okay. So I'll be hoping to meet with him on that issue next week.
Okay, have you got a figure in mind?
I won't be discussing it here. I'll discuss it with Minister McGrath, and then discuss it with Cabinet.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Minister. Just on the childcare fees, I mean, do you have a plan B if enough providers don't sign up to this scheme? And can you give an estimate of when you expect childcare fees to come down, given the level of investment you plan to put into the sector?
Well, I think this is the plan for the sector. It's a plan that is based on the work that the expert group has been doing over the last 2 years. They're going to bring their final report to me in November of this year, but I'd be aware of the kind of the clear direction of travel, and they're suggesting that this idea of core funding for services is the way to ensure the sustainability of services. And certainly everything I've heard from childcare providers so far sees that they recognise the scale of what we're committing to here, and I think the majority recognise again that direction of travel, that the state needs to put in greater investment, more public investment, but the quid pro quo for that is greater public management as well, and that's seen in terms of the commitment not to increase fees. That's seen in an agreement to pay the JLC rates to childcare professionals. So I believe that we'll get the support of the sector for this. In terms of when we will see fees fall further, well, look, I'm certainly committed to doing all I can as Minister to get fees to fall, and by creating the mechanism of an agreement not to raise fees further, we have the first really important step in that. Because as I said earlier, I can put all the money I want into the NCS. if providers are just going to up their fees because they're not sustainable, that gets eroded away immediately. Whereas now, with an agreement not to increase fees, future investments into the NCS and the investment we're putting in this year will actually be felt in parents' pockets.
And how would that be monitored? Because, say if childcare costs were, X this year, a new family coming to that provider next year might not be aware of what those costs were. So I'm just wondering, will you have a system in place for price monitoring to make sure people are adhering to that agreement?
We'd have a very strong sense of fees across the sector. All childcare providers are registered. Virtually all childcare providers already have a relationship with our department, be it through the NCS, be it through ECHE. So we'd have a very strong understanding on a very individualised basis of what the existing fees are.
Okay, so just to be clear, there is a database with the level of fees on it, and that gets updated.
Sorry.
Is there a database then that has the fees for provider that gets updated every year to monitor things like that? Yeah. Okay, and just finally, how sustainable is it for the state to be subventing private industry? I mean, these are private businesses. How long can the state, subvent that?
Well, look, the state has to invest in childcare. If you look at our investment compared to investment in any other comparator European countries, we are a very significant way off. So countries all over the world invest in this area, and they invest heavily. As I said earlier, we've only started investing in the last 10 years, and that's why the curve for us is so steep in terms of what we're trying to catch up with. But that increased public investment has to come in tandem with increased public management. And the key new public management tool that we're introducing this time is that idea of an agreement not to increase fees. So the investment that we're putting in is delivering in terms of better wages for childcare professionals, and will be delivering in terms of reduced costs for parents.
Okay, thank you.
Minister, were you surprised by the reaction from some of the groups yesterday, and particularly some of the parents as well that we spoke to yesterday on the news were kind of saying, look, it really doesn't go far enough. Freezing fees is great and all, but you're freezing them at a time when they're particularly high.
Look, I think there's been a range of reactions, and some of it has been very positive. I know the Big Start campaign, which includes childcare providers and childcare professionals, have given it a really, really warm welcome. I know I've received emails in today from providers who worked in the sector for a long time who really welcomed these changes. I absolutely understand where parents are saying that they want to see more action in terms of reducing fees. But what we've done with this budget, by putting in that extra investment in tandem with the commitment not to raise fees, that gives us that mechanism in this budget and in future budgets to ensure that any further investment really has an impact in terms of reducing costs for parents.
But can parents look forward to a time, maybe be it next year or the year after, where they're actually paying a little bit less for childcare? That's really what they're worried about.
Yeah. Well, look, again, as I said to Jack, there will be thousands of parents next year paying less because of these measures. A modest amount less, but they will be paying less. And we shouldn't talk as if parents aren't getting anything out of this. Thousands of parents will be. But I accept it's modest. But I suppose as long as I'm in this role, it will be my commitment to continue to look to reduce the costs of childcare for parents, and through the decision we took yesterday, we have a clear mechanism and an effective mechanism to do that.
And just to go back, I know Jack asked you earlier just about the situation in terms of the easing of restrictions on the 22nd of October. You said there's no plans to make any changes there. What is your sense of the situation in terms of, obviously we're hearing a couple of red flags being mooted today?
Well, look, I suppose I don't want to say much more in terms of until I see clear advice from NPHET. As I said, we've seen the nightly figures kind of yo-yo from, it was down under 1,000 there last weekend, which was a really positive day, to shooting up very higher subsequently. And I suppose you always keep a close eye on the figures for hospitalisations and ICU. But I want to await NPHET's advice in terms of the next steps. But currently, there's no plans to change the change, the reduction of restrictions on the 22nd of October, but obviously we've always acted on the basis of public health advice.
Okay, thank you.
Minister, just in relation to this briefing document we've got here about the 4.5 million for the action plan regarding the Mother and Baby Homes Commission following the final report, is that totally separate to the redress, or what exactly is that? Is that just administrative?
Yeah, so across a number of parts of my vote, we are providing additional money. So some of the additional money for TUSLA and the Adoption Authority of Ireland will be to facilitate the information and tracing legislation, which we very much hope will be passed soon. As you know, it's still in pre-legislative scrutiny at the moment. I'm very much looking forward for it coming out of committee so we can bring it into the Oireachtas. But we have put in place funding for additional staff in TUSLA and AAI to implement that access to information once the bill is passed. We've also made provision for the agency that will undertake the excavation and the exhumation of the body of infants and children at Tuam. That's provided for in terms of the vote as well. And again, once the institutional burials bill is passed, I'd hope that will be up and running next year, and that work can commence. So those would be the two main parts of that allocation.
Okay, and just on childcare, with regard to the extension of hours, eligibility for all children regardless of their parents' circumstances, will you be putting additional financial support in place to help families take up those hours?
Well, those hours would be accessed already, but because of an existing rule within the system, hours spent in ECHE or in school were deducted from the parents' total number of hours. So particularly during term time, the outcome of that was that many of these, because a school, they have 20 hours per week, school is more than 20 hours, so they didn't get any after school. So by removing that rule, children will be entitled to access their full number of 20 hours, be it in term or out. So that's a really significant move. The existing rule was one that had been heavily criticised by a number of providers, particularly community providers in areas of high disadvantage. There was a significant demonstration about it outside the Dáil a number of weeks ago, and I chatted with many of the providers there. It's something I've been aware of since I've come into the department, something I've engaged with officials about a lot, and we think this is a significant move. It will improve sustainability of services in these areas, but most importantly, it will allow these children and young people access enhanced number of childcare hours or after school hours.
Okay, and I just have questions for Minister Rabbitte as well, just regarding Minister McGrath announcing 105 million for disability services. You tweeted the same. The Minister for Health tweets that it's 55 million. Just where is the confusion there? I think the department sought to clarify it, but is it a 65 million new spend or 55 million, or what is it?
Alva, I'm delighted you've asked the question, because the way the breakdown of it was 50 million was existing level of service agreement, okay? 55 million is new development, and then there was 10 million, separate to the 10 million that Minister McGrath announced at the very end of his speech. There was another 10 million COVID funding to address my waiting list initiative. So that's where the 65 million came on. That 10 million will not go into the base next year. It's 55 million that will be going into it. So I wanted to be very clear. There is a waiting list initiative. I wanted to give a clear signal to parents saying what's going to happen now that you've done an assessment of need and everybody is saying it's great work. What's the follow-up of it? I secured 10 million to do the follow-up work.
So the department said you'd secured 10 million by the end of the year for upgrading services. Is that 10 million?
No.
Okay.
So let's be clear. I had a very successful budget. Okay, I had 50 million under existing level of service. I got 55 million for new developments. I got 10 million for a waiting list initiative. And I got 10 million as well to be spent by the end of the year on transport and also on assistive technology.
And what's that, assistive technology?
Well, I think, Alva, that is really where we have to see what the day services are up and running, hopefully 22nd of October. And there was two things that stood out to me in relation to day services. One is getting people back to the day services. And a lot of people that provide fabulous service would have said our transport fleet is under pressure. So that was one of the things. And having to work with Minister O'Gorman here, and it being the Green Minister, I was hoping that we would do something along the green way of doing things, maybe encouraging providers to come more on board. So that was one part. The other piece then was to do with the assistive technology. Not everybody wants to return to services 5 days a week. So how can we make them feel part and parcel of it? So how can you have that iPad? But more importantly, how can the service providers have the large screens so as you feel that you're part of the room, but still be part of the whole community? That's the whole idea that I've come up with that 2 million there for.
Okay, thanks.
Minister, just on the direct provision, the funding that was assigned to that area, what actually will that result in next year?
So as you know, you probably saw in the NDP, the National Development Plan, there's a very clear commitment to the implementation of the white paper in terms of capital investment. And that's going to help us achieve new units for independent living, which is the whole idea of phase 2 of the white paper. Obviously, those units have to be fitted out. And people who are living in those units, they will be living independently. They won't be getting the kind of the food hall approach that's occurring in a lot of direct provision centres at the moment. So they're going to need the start of the International Protection Allowance, which was one of that independent living payment that is provided for within the white paper. So the additional funding that we've secured for the implementation of the white paper next year are things like fitting out these new units for accommodation, starting off the international protection allowance for people living independently. It's also looking at maybe starting initial funding calls for NGOs and AHBs in terms of giving them a fund to bid for, in terms of them maybe looking at sites which can be used for accommodation as well. Because as I've always made it clear, the ending of direct provision and the success of the white paper isn't just going to be the government alone. It's going to be the government working with the NGOs, working with the AHBs to deliver a range of accommodation solutions.
So by the end of the year, there are a certain number of units that you expect to be completed?
By the end of the year, yeah, we will have, I think for next year, it'll probably be purchase of units that we'll be focusing on, because obviously it takes, the building does take a little bit longer. But we are working very closely with the Housing Agency. I'm very grateful to Minister Darragh O'Brien for giving us access to the Housing Agency, and they've dedicated a number of staff just to supporting the white paper, and they'll be helping us in terms of plans for building either directly by the department or creating, I suppose, funding streams that approved housing bodies can bid for, that they would then build units of accommodation for international protection seekers.
So how many then by the end of next year is envisaged?
I don't have a clear picture as to the exact total as yet. As I say, there's a number of papers coming from the Housing Authority before the programme board, that's the body that's implementing the white paper at the moment. So probably towards the end of the year, I probably have a better sense of that.
Thanks.
That's great, folks. Thanks very much.